physical power behind it. So you're oh, hey, we're live.
Hey,
wow.
everyone. Awesome. Okay, we're a little bit off schedule, a little bit late, but hopefully we can condense everything together. Welcome, everyone. This is our first Knife Club meeting in Toronto, and we're so happy to have everyone come together, including Ivan in Kyoto and David Starks in North Dakota. I want to introduce
Hello.
you all.
Hello.
Your mic's not on.
Oh, my mic's not on?
I can hear her.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
Go ahead.
Yep, I can hear everybody good.
okay.
Go ahead.
So Ivan's in Kyoto, and he's sharpening and polishing out there. He works with Konosuke Sakai. Am I allowed to say that, Ivan? Sorry.
Well, we're
do you wanna
live and you
introduce
did,
yourself?
so.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Okay. So Ivan's polishing and shaping knives in Japan right now. He's been out there since for 9.5 years now, I think. And David
Yep.
Starks, we've known you for a long time. We started off. You were a customer at Tosho, and
Yep.
you've just been collecting some insane knives. We just know of you to be very curious and interested, and going a really long distance to get the kind of collection that you have. And from what I understand is that you and Ivan have great conversations that I thought would be really interesting for people to kind of chime in on and hear the kind of things you guys talk about. So I'll let you guys take it from here.
Thanks so much for the introduction. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
it's
thank
been,
you.
I think I started getting I enjoyed cooking when I was in high school. And then like my parents like bought what they thought were expensive knives when I was in high school and used them and didn't understand how come it felt like they got dull like pretty quick. And no matter how many times we used that honing rod, like it never seemed to sharpen them again. And so I thought it must have been just that they had really bad knives. I just need to get good knives is what it is. And so when I first graduated from college and could buy my own set, like I bought a small set of Wusthof knives and was like, I've made it. This is going to be perfect. They're going to be amazing. They'll last me forever, right? Because, these are international standard from everything I'd read. And then 2 years later, they got dull like everything else. And no matter how hard I used that honing rod or whatever I was using, it wasn't bringing that sharpness back. And that's what started me off on my trail back in like 2014 of launching into Japanese knives. And that is what has slowly but surely led me to here today.
Thanks.
Yeah,
very cool.
I remembered that actually. I remember when you first contacted me actually. That was like in 2015 or something like that.
Yep.
2015, right?
I think the first thing that really happened
questions.
was I got a 270 Blue One Fujiyama from Tosho.
That's
that
right.
Tosho got. It was like this, like you had like two off that had it was like the Zercoat handles that were really, really nice on them.
Yeah, right. I remember those. Yeah.
And the Fujiyamas at that time, they didn't all have Hanbasuke. Like that wasn't a standard thing yet. They were just only the ones going to Tosho had that. And so the first time I even like test cut with it, I was like, what is this? like this is incredible. This is so good. And so I asked Olivia, I was like, what did you do before you sent me this knife? And she's like, oh, well, actually that might've been Ivan, that did that. If you want to reach out to him. And so I sent you, that's like the first time I reached out, I was like, what on God's green earth did you do to this? Because this feels incredible to cut with. And you're like, oh yeah, I can tell you about it. I'm like, oh no, this doesn't make any sense to me at all. I have a lot of stuff I gotta learn.
Were you sharpening at that time or no? Not at all. Nothing.
I had, I think like a 1K, 6K combination Kingstone that I had put like a either like some of my like the German blades too or something, but I was too scared to touch my Japanese blades on there yet because like they had that like, well, if you go too low on grit, you can screw up a knife really fast. And so I was like, well, I gotta get some training and understanding before I put steel to stone. But so I had attempted but hadn't gotten too far into it yet.
Right. And then the first time I guess you actually officially had a class was
in 2018 when there was the Konosuke Tosho collab that you had in Toronto that I thought for sure.
Right.
Having you come back from Japan and having Kosuke come all the way from Sakai, I was like, there's gonna be people coming from all over for this. Like, I gotta make sure I make it. And so I drove from North Dakota to Toronto to find out I was the only person that wasn't local that came. And I was like, you guys are crazy.
That's
This
true.
is such good info.
That's right. Yeah, I guess that's when you first. Is that the first time you ever had an official
Yes.
sharpening class? Right.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. I had a makeshift one with you. I remember the one thing that stuck out. Well, two things stuck out from that so much. The first was when I started sharpening, you watched me for a little bit and you're like, okay, like you commented I was holding my angle well, but you're like, hold out your hand. And then you pressed in the middle of my hand with your fingers and you're like, this is how hard you need to be pressing. Cause you could tell that I was just like barely whispering it on the stone because I was too scared to put too much pressure. And then the other one was when you were like, when I was talking about trying to understand what would it take to chase down this certain type of end result for Han Buzzcut,
Right.
if I'm wanting,
Right.
not too much refinement, if I wanted that toothiness. And I was like, what progression do I need? And you grabbed a Naniwa Pro, like a Chaucer 400, and you
Right.
sharpened the blade just on that. Like you ground off the edge first, just put a fresh 400 grit edge on it, and then you shaved the hair on your arm. And you're like, really, if you get good enough, you can just do it with a 400. And that blew my mind. It is stuck with me to this day.
Yeah, I remember that. I still remember that you were really surprised by that. That was a 400 grit finish.
Yeah. Oh man.
And
yeah, that was.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess, but yeah, it's true though. I mean, if you go through the right steps, the right technique, yeah, that 400 grit can feel actually like more like an 800, maybe. If you know what I'm saying.
Sure.
Like a lot of
Sure.
people are kind of surprised by like what a 400 grit edge stropped on just plain leather feels like. It feels very different, right, than you're used to.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. I
remember you were really pretty surprised.
I was very surprised.
Can I chime in there a little bit?
Hop in,
My
yeah.
first time, it's funny that you bring that up, David, because of course, when I learned how to use Japanese natural stones, I was told that using 1,000 would be the safest thing, just so that I'm not removing unnecessary amounts of steel. And then, so it's not until Ivan told me, he's like, you need to use this, use this first. I'm like, are you sure? You're going to remove like so much steel. And then the kind of pressure that I realized created such a foundational bevel. That changed everything when I was exactly what you were saying. And I think people need to see that. And that's what I teach a lot of the times in the classes is the kind of pressure that you need that's necessary in order to find the right angle too. Anyway, sorry, I just had to kind of mention how important that was. It's funny that you mentioned that was something that stood out for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one thing that was really cool too was after I had that like a mini class with you, we didn't have a terrible amount of time, but I think it was about a half hour that you were going through some of those basics. You had said like, hey, well, Olivia has a class that they're doing like it was gonna be on Saturday or something. Like you should, if you want, like, we can get you in that. I was like, yeah, definitely. And I it was just me and one other guy with Brian, and that 30 minutes. That 30 minutes with you was enough where Brian was impressed. He's like, oh, I can really tell you've been working at this. I was like, nope, just really good instruction one time, but thanks, man. Like, oh. So we kind of launched in quick on where I started with all this, but how about you? Like you have you're pretty well established now, both in the online community and around Tosho, as you understand sharpening. But how did you even get into it? What was that path like for you?
That would be a long time ago when I was actually a boy. My first time I've ever was shown anything to do with sharpening was with my grandfather, and that was not knives. That was actually sharpening tools for woodworking. So I guess I was lucky that actually he used Japanese water stones at that time. I don't actually even know what. I think I remember he had a box that he gave me like when he was pretty old, and there was a bunch of different tools and stones in there. So I would imagine what I learned on all those years ago was actually a king stone. because
Sure.
those are the stones that he had in his box. And you got to that would have been in the that would have been in the
You're dating yourself.
like in the 80s, early 80s, like 81 or 82. So
So you're
that's
predating the Ninja Turtles with your sharpening experience.
that's right. So that would be the very first experience I've ever had, would be at that time. And then I don't know, I guess I just kept on kind of being fascinated by it. But then when I actually started working in a French restaurant when I was 16, that's kind of when things it just kind of things very slowly started coming together. But that would have been the first time when I was a
Interesting.
child, actually. Yeah,
What-
long time ago.
What part of it grabbed you? Was there aspirations for polishing back then, or was it just the relatively simple, like, hey, with just technique, steel and stone can it can be radically different, radically better if I just invest the time? What really grabbed your imagination, if you remember?
I don't actually think it was actually really anything. I think it was just the overall experience of if you put this on this brick and you do the right thing, you can get something sharp. I think
Sure.
as a child, that was kind of just fascinating. So it wasn't really like, I don't really even, at that time, I don't really even know if I understood, this is sharpening, right? It was more
Okay.
like, I think when I first started, when I was a kid working in a restaurant, then I started to realize that, because actually, like you said, people were using a honing rod, but I actually wasn't taught that. I was actually taught, well, if you want something sharp, use it, put it on a stone. But that was all coming from tools, so very different. And you got to remember, that's in like the 80s, so that's all.
It's amazing that you had like that in your grandfather. Like, I think of how much I crutch just running to YouTube or running to Instagram to like find, like, okay, what was this again? Like, what was that technique they did for using a marker? Like, how could you use this? How could I spot check? Blah blah blah. You weren't doing that in the 80s when you're learning sharpening.
And it was a kind of a strange thing. So I think when I was about 18 or 19, things started to come together more, and I started studying. Winnipeg, actually, in the universities had very good libraries,
Oh,
right? And that at that time there's no internet, right? There's nothing. So there's just books. So, but the library had like an incredible section on Japanese like Japanese gardens, all these different kind of topics. But because it's a university, there was actually very good books. So the first kind of idea I've got about sharpening was actually a Japanese sword book, and
that's crazy.
that's kind of what actually started everything. Really, it's really didn't really have anything to do with really kitchen knives. It was more like, well, my grandfather was a woodworker. He used Japanese whetstones, so that's where that all kind of came from. It's like, okay, well, let me check what does that equate to. So I found some old books on carpentry, Japanese carpentry, and then there was two old Japanese sword books, how to appraise swords, how to look at swords, and there were some other, like, small sections on everything, how they're forged, how they're polished, all those things. So that's kind of where it all started to come together for me, I guess.
That's interesting. Did you ever, especially with your grandfather being like starting you off almost with tools, was there ever a time pushing towards like something like Kezro Kai over sword polishing, or did that ever speak to you as much?
No, actually, not at all. It's kind of strange. It's just like I just focused in on this one thing. So, and I've been doing that ever since. So you can count the years. It's a long time.
That's really cool. See, you got into it from your grandfather, like you started to get experience with the application of that in a restaurant scene when you're 16. 18, you're finding books like at your university on Japanese like craftsmanship, as it were, which is crazy. I haven't been able to find a book like that until I'm looking online for specific titles that you maybe have mentioned to me. So that's a treasure to find. How then do we get to Tosho? How, like, what was that road to go from you're getting interested in swords, you have this background in sharpening, you're starting to see the application in restaurants. How do we get from there to you and Olivia are opening up Tosho Knife Arts?
Actually, yeah. When did you start cooking, Ivan?
Well, I started, I guess, really cooking probably, well, I started working in a restaurant when I was 16, but I wouldn't call that really work. I was a kid, so I technically couldn't work legally, but I got a job making soup stocks for a French restaurant, and that's how I started. So I guess I really started cooking when I was probably around in the 1990s, mid 1990s. I worked in a few different restaurants, but I think where everything kind of, I became a private chef in 2000. And
Yeah.
in 2000, when I became a private chef, I actually had a lot of time because I was my own boss, right?
Yeah.
So I could actually explore a lot of things, and I also had a good enough budget that I could buy what I needed for the kitchen in the home that I worked in. And at that time, I had already kind of started collecting a few knives here and there from like this is early 2000s, so there wasn't a lot of, I think there was Global you could find, there was maybe Shun, but I came across a really unique store that actually had a bunch of different Japanese knives, single bevels and stuff like that,
wow.
which was really rare for me to see.
In Toronto?
In Toronto, yeah.
Okay.
I can't remember what it was called. I don't even know if it's still around. It may not be, but anyways, it. So when I was cooking, as a private chef, I started actually. I already had stones. Already had a few different things. So that's kind of where it all started, because I had the time to actually start to really play around, I guess you could say, and really start. Well, what if I sharpen this, or what if I do that? What if I take this Yanagiba and put it and start doing it on a natural stone? What if I do this? What if I do that? What happens? So I really started experimenting at that time with different things. And then, yeah, slowly, after I stopped being a private chef, I just continued everything. And then eventually, when I was working in the last restaurant I ever worked at, which doesn't exist anymore, called Massis in Toronto. Okay. Then what's interesting, what happened there is that everybody kept breaking their knives all the time.
Like how so?
Like literally trying to open a can and the knife would snap in half, or taking knives and cutting things they shouldn't be cutting. And
God.
So they're always damaging knives, and they actually had a lot of German knives, but I mean they're all pretty good knives. And so everyone would always ask me, "Hey, can you fix this? Can you fix this?" Because they always saw that my knives always were looked brand new, as they would always say. So, and actually at that time I had all Japanese knives, and they had actually in the kitchen, and that was around 2007, I think, 2007, 2008, maybe. So.
Peak original knife forums time, like.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, exactly. Yeah, and so that's kind of where that started. So I started actually just repairing everybody's knives in the kitchen, was actually a lot of work, because it was weekly. There was something to actually sharpen, and
it sounds like not just touch up sharpen, but like recover from the brink of disaster. Like
that's right. Yeah. Completely reshaping, refinishing. So, and I was doing all this by stones, because I had no concept of, well, if I actually had a machine, this must, like, now when I think back about it, I was like, if I had a machine, it would have been so much easier. But at that time, I did everything on stones completely. And so it kind of went from there, and then because I had quite a few Japanese knives already at that time. I think I even had at that time I had two Takedas. I had a Deba and a Ajikiri,
Okay.
and I also had Yoshikane, and I had quite a few knives at that time already
Wow.
that I had bought from Takeda. I had bought directly from Takeda at that time. I had ordered through his website,
Mm-hmm.
and I had bought also from a store in San Francisco. I can't remember the name of it. I don't even think it's there.
It's not Bernal, right?
It's not Bernal. No. This was Japanese tools, and they sold tools, but they also had a large selection of kitchen knives from mainly Yoshikane. Seemed to be like really Sanjo focused.
Interesting.
So I actually bought a lot of stuff from that shop. So I had a lot of Japanese knives at the
I
time.
was gonna say, were they associated with like what was like Hide Tool was big back in like the late 2000s?
Yeah, Hide Tools was, but it wasn't Hide Tools. I can't remember the name.
Okay.
But so what happened is that everybody in the restaurant saw I had Japanese knives, so they started buying Japanese knives. But the same thing happened. They bought the Japanese knives and started breaking their, like the thing kept on continuing. So then what happened is that I had to actually refinish and reshape and repolish all the knives that they had, and they started. So you imagine, like there was like about 10. There was about altogether about 10 staff, and in the kitchen there was about 6 guys, and that rotated. And each guy had about at least 5 to 6 knives. And my boss at the time, he had really quickly collected 10 kitchen knives.
Okay.
So all of them were actually always running into issues. Either they get rust or they chip them, or they have problems. So I would constantly be refinishing people's knives. And then, so that's kind of where a lot of my technique came from. And around 2008 is like, I thought, well, I already know how to sharpen.
Yeah.
I have an understanding of sword polishing. So at that time I started thinking, well, okay, if I saw a knife that was, say, for example, sandblasted, so it was sandblast with a mirror finish, right? I would always think, okay, well, how can I recreate this just with stones? So that's kind of where all that started from. It's just it was out of necessity, because I was getting all these knives and I wanted to reshape them, and a lot of the times make them sharper, make the geometry better.
Yeah.
So
probably some thickness on those German blades.
Yeah. So, and then that kind of led into me opening my own business by myself, which was called Fonseca Sharpening, where I did custom refinishing and restoration, but I also did, I made sayas too. Probably a lot of people that don't know that, but I also made custom sayas for people. And then, around, I think 2010, then I met Olivia. And we started talking together, and I actually needed help because I was actually really busy. And I was still, at the time, I was a full-time chef in a restaurant, but I was also full-time. I had this as full-time job. So I was working all day long, like all the time. Like I would finish a shift at a restaurant at 11 p.m. and then I would leave and go to other restaurants to pick up knives after they closed. So that was my life for many years. But then I met Olivia, and we kind of decided, let's do this together. And then we started Tosho Knife Arts officially, I guess, in 2011 or something. So
I thought it was 11 and 12 was what I saw from like old blogs.
So that's kind of where it all came from. So
that's really cool. When you were in that phase of sharpening knife after knife for different restaurants, both for your coworkers and others, had you moved on from Kingstones, or are you still using King? Like, what were you using in that time frame?
At the time when Naniwa Chosera first came out, I immediately started using Naniwa Chosera. That would have been Wow, that would have been, I think, around 2009, maybe.
Okay.
Before that, I was using the natural stones that I had. Like I had Ohira Suita, I had Alto, I had a bunch of, I had Uchigamori and Binsui. I had a bunch of different stones at the time. Then some of the synthetic stones I had, yeah, just random stuff. Probably King that I found. I think Shapton. Those are the things that you could find. I think there was like I definitely had Naniwa professional stones. But as soon as the Chaucera line was released, I remember that's actually all I started using because I just liked the feedback from those stones.
I would imagine that that would have represented a pretty significant like decrease in the amount of time that it took to make those sharpenings and repair, right?
I guess so, but overall, I mean, I was always focused on polishing. Like,
Okay.
I've always just been focused on polishing, even though for a necessity, I worked in a restaurant, things have to function, right? They've got to function for hours on end. They've got to function in different situations. They've got to function not on the best board, cutting
Yeah.
boards, right? So I was always focused professionally on function, but all I ever thought about was polishing. That's all I ever thought about. So when I got the stones, Chaucera stones, I mainly liked them not because they were faster, or I liked them just because of the finish that I could get from them.
Interesting. Was it more uniform finish, or did you feel like they were a little more truer to grit? So like a 400 was a 400, or
Kind of like that. I mean, I really like even though I would say that the Chaucera 1000 is a difficult stone to work with to get a really good differentiation between the hard and soft steel.
okay.
But I really liked when you could get it when it was on, that stone was great, and it finished slightly finer than most of the 1000 grit stones that I had used previously. So I really liked it, but I really like those things for those reasons, and I did use them both for edge sharpening and for polishing. And
Okay.
then I think I was at that time I was just using using 400, 1000. I think I was probably using at the time also from this other places I was using the Arashiyama 6K.
Yeah.
And a lot of other stones like that I had found. So, yeah.
That's really cool. That's really cool. So you and Olivia meet. You start Tosho, or we're around 2011 right now. When I came down for that, when I suppose came up for that Kanosuke X Tosho event, went out to got to go out to eat with you guys when we're talking. And when I was like hearing your history kind of for the first time there, one of the questions I had asked was, I was like, how did, what took you, you born and raised in Canada, like so much of your life felt like it was revolving around the food industry, like you were like really ingraining yourselves into like that scene by both being a supplier of knives and also like a repairer of knives, and that's where all your experience was. And then in like around 2014, you go to Japan. And I was like, how did that happen? And Olivia jumped in and she was like, oh, well, if you know him, it makes a lot of sense. And it was like, you're like, yeah, it does. And then like the topic got changed and it never went back to it. And I was like, I'm sure it does make sense, but I don't know it. What was it? What like transpired in that? Because it's kind of a commitment to get a business partner and to start another company that was going to be about importing knives and providing both a knife sharpening service and repair service, along with like setting up everything you've done. What happened in that 3-year span that like caused the push to be like, now is the time to change everything I've known for the past 30 years?
30 years. I think it's a lot of different things. I mean, it's just always the things that I'm always searching for. I mean, with sharpening in general, like I'm always trying to be a better sharpener and a better polisher. That was one big thing. And around the time when we and Olivia first went to Japan, we visited Takeda. And when I went back to Japan on my own, I also visited Takeda by myself.
Okay.
And I kind of studied. I wouldn't say studied with him, but I did work with him for about a month. I can't remember the exact amount of time, but yeah, I just always it always felt like I wanted, in order to get better at what I was doing at my work. It was kind of just this natural thing that I felt for my work,
Okay.
that I needed to understand. Yeah, because there's things that I learned even just from Takeda. His father was a sword maker, so
Yeah.
going to museums with Takeda, he would show me things that, like, you just don't get that. You need, like, you can see one or two swords, right, in museums or things like that, but when you've seen 1,000 swords, and when you've talked to and you've seen 1,000 swords from many different eras, and you talk to many different polishers, and your perspective of sharpening and polishing completely changes. So I think it was kind of that. It was that. I guess the next move is where, yeah, in order to get to the level I wanted to get, I felt that I needed to, yeah, just move to Japan and start. Of course, yeah, working with Konosuke, because that's another very different,
Yeah.
area of things. But yeah, for me personally, it was really that. It's just this personal, yeah, commitment or something.
That's
Yeah,
really cool.
I
it's
made
all-
that. I made that comment, probably saying belongs in Japan. It was just one of
Yeah.
those things. Like, if you shouldn't be here right now, Ivan, just get out of here. It's just the
and
people,
yeah,
people he could
yeah,
speak
yeah.
with,
It's interesting.
get him, all in Japan.
Yeah.
And it was not really a big, like, a lot of people always ask me, like, was it a really big shift? But it wasn't really, because when I was a child, actually, and probably a lot of people don't know this, but my parents were Buddhists and they were actually oddly, they were
Really?
like from studied Japanese Buddhism. Not study, but they were a sect of Buddhism that's in Japan. So when I
Really?
was a kid, I was around that all the time, and when yeah, like my mother ate a very certain type of macrobiotic diet that was from Japan, and so food and all that stuff and all that, these kind of things weren't. Everything was already pretty familiar to me, so it wasn't a really big. I don't know why. It was just, it didn't. I've always been so focused on sharpening, so I've never really thought about, oh well, I'm in a different place.
Sure.
It's just been this natural thing where, okay, now I'm here, I can see this, I can do that, I can learn this, I can learn that, and it hasn't stopped. Actually, it'll never stop. There's
Yeah.
too much things to learn, and you'll never be good enough. So
Sure. I can mirror that sentiment a little bit. I remember when I was talking with the first trip that I made to Japan, which was in 19, when I got to come and visit. A few people asked me, like, "Well, where are you going to go, and like, what are you going to eat, and what do you want to go see?" And it was like, "Well, I'm going there for knives." And so I'm hoping to get to go to
I
Sanjo to
remember
see
that.
Yoshikane and Watanabe, and I'm hoping to go to Sakai, and I want to see, all the Dento Kogechi, and I want to talk to Konosuke, and I want to go to all these places. And they're like, "But what about this, this, and this?" And I'm like, I don't care about that. That's not why I'm going. I'm going for this reason, like, because you can only get that here. That's why I'm going. And I had so many people tell me, like, "Oh, you're traveling wrong." I'm like, I don't want to travel like you travel. Like this, this is. I can only get these things here. That's why I'm going. So I definitely mirror what you're talking about to some extent of, like, this is something I wanted. I could only find it here. Of course I have to go there, like, for this thing. And it doesn't feel too foreign in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because now outside of Japan, like, there's so many incredible makers. There's so, like, but when we first started Tosho, I don't even know of one's. There probably definitely there was some people, but I mean, you couldn't find anybody that was even making honyaki
Sure.
outside of Japan.
Sure.
But now I believe that there's more people making honyaki kitchen knives outside of Japan than there are in Japan. So, like, there's this huge shift, and there's so many incredible makers outside of Japan and all over the world now. It's
Yeah.
totally different landscape than it was when like in early 2000s, then when we started Tosho. So yeah, it's very, very different
Yeah.
world now.
It's crazy how just how different 10, 15 years really has made things, where it feels like so many aspects are not even necessarily calling it globalization, but through the access that the internet has provided, like there's people are able to learn things and pick things up so much quicker without having to
Yeah.
go and have like a 5 or 10 year discipleship in Japan to pick something up, which is cool.
Yeah. In Japan, it's interesting. It's still very similar. Like there is a sword polisher, very famous sword polisher, and he recently got a new student.
Okay.
And I remember it was basically like, okay, I'll see you in 10 years kind of thing. Like,
yeah.
you know what I mean? Like he started, okay, now he's going to go for 10 years. And that's really, but like outside of Japan, it's interesting. You can pick up, like you said, there's so many resources now. You can talk to people. There's just videos everywhere. It's incredible, actually, what you can learn.
Yeah.
Anywhere you are in the world, it's pretty incredible.
Absolutely. One of the things that you mentioned was there was a almost like a change, like a change in your mindset, like a full frame shift in your perspective on sharpening after you had that opportunity to go there and talk with people that had seen a thousand swords and could talk to you about it. Do you remember any of like some of those key first changes that hit that it felt like I'm thinking about specifically this differently now, or just like what any of those things were that really hit you?
I remember with going to again, this is probably all just really has to do with polishing. I think for sharpening specifically, when I first met Morihiro actually and saw him sharpening and how he did it, I was always blown away, because a lot of people never really saw him, or they've never seen him in his workshop working all the time regularly. And I remember seeing him doing one of his doing a shinogi style gyuto for Konosuke. And I remember seeing him working on the large wheel.
Okay.
And he did both sides, and then he has a habit, and a lot of sharpeners do, where they have a stone beside the wheel, and they go to test the blade just to see where it's at.
Sure.
The geometry, if they're hitting everything correctly.
Sure.
And I think what I was so surprised by is that when he came off the wheel and put it onto the stone, his geometry was perfect. So
Really?
the shinogi line touched, everything was the hira touched, everything was the blade road, everything was all lined up, and on the 220 grit stone that he had on there, everything basically touched. So
Wow.
it's kind of like those experiences that I have, where I was always pretty blown away by like the level of technique a lot of people have achieved that most people never see, right?
Yeah.
But just being around that all the time, every day, and even with different polishers, sword polishers and sharpeners, when you're with them all the time, you start to see what level they're actually really at. And I think a lot of people don't really see that. And that's kind of what really opened my eyes, is that, wow, there's a completely other level that is attainable, that a lot of people will never witness. But I felt for myself, wow, I've got to keep on pushing much harder, because these guys are light years up from where I feel I was at the time. So
yeah. And I know part of that too is to some extent, like it's to be able to see and recognize that talent in and of itself takes talent, right? It's kind of like one of those things where if you see a mountain in the distance, like you're like, oh yeah, it's tall. But then as you get closer to that mountain, you can be like, you can respect the scale of it more. Like there are definitely certain things that you've polished that I've looked at and be like, wow, that's incredible. But I definitely understand like the limits of my technical ability in polishing like limit my ability to appreciate just how crazy some of those things are, past just like I know that it's crazy because other people that are better than me say like I don't know how he does it. it's that's really cool to hear that multiple decades of your life into thinking and dreaming about sharpening and specifically polishing, you go there and still are saying like, oh wow, yeah, they're even better than I could have imagined. That's really cool.
Yeah, you get this interesting perspective because when you're doing something literally over and over and over again, day after day after day after day, like it's not just like maybe you do some polishing or sharpening on the weekend. It's like when you're doing it 10, 15 hours a day, every day, that's all you do. That's all you think about. You don't even, when you go out, you're just going to museums when you're to see something or you're visiting another craftsman. So yeah, I guess you get, the world just becomes, it's just this. That's all that's all you're focused on. So yeah, your perspective on your own work changes. Everything changes. Even how you look at a knife when you see a knife in a shop, you always it looks, it's a knife, but you see the geometry, you see the angles, you see everything, and you think, okay, if I did that, how would I have changed it? How did the craftsman do that? There's new questions that arise, right, all the time from experience, I guess.
Yeah. I remember we were talking about, you had mentioned how in some of your time when you worked with Konosuke, you got to work with Kosuke's father, specifically around how so much time at the beginning was spent around judging if a blade is straight or not.
Yeah.
And I think we had, I think it was an Ashi Honyaki, I think it was a single bevel that I don't know if it was Brian that had it, but someone had brought it in. And I was able to see it next to you, and you're like, oh, well, it makes sense. This is a 300. You can see there's this little twist in the blade here. And I was just like perplexed. I'm like, what are you talking about? Because I'm looking at it, I was like, this looks straight. And you're like, no, you can see it right here. I'm like, maybe you can see it, but what are you talking about? And like with you pointing it out, like holding it up in the window of the old shop, I'm like, I could felt the moment where it like clicked into place. I'm like, oh, I see it now. I felt like I was looking at a different blade like than I had been looking at 2 seconds prior when you helped zero my eyes in on this, what to me before been completely imperceptible, but literally this slight twist that was in the blade. And you're like, yeah, that's likely to happen, especially with Honyaki that are this long and blah, 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 blah. But it was crazy to think that I was dead sure. Like this looks straight as an arrow. This looks perfect. And you're like, no, there's definitely a twist here. And slowly being able to see that. It's
yeah, that's one thing, big thing about sharpening. One thing that I've always understood, and there's always certain things you understand, but when you start to, what you understand is kind of being put to the test, you have to really start looking at things differently. And yeah, straightening knives I remember the first time when I first started working with Konosuke, and I started working, like his Kosuke's father was always there. He's like, yeah, it's going to take at least 5 years for you to be able to see properly.
Yeah, I remember you saying that.
And it's going to take 5 years to be able to even straighten properly. And it actually did. It actually took that long. I thought I could straighten pretty well. I thought I could see pretty well, but like, no, when I look back at it, I couldn't see. I can see now pretty good. There's still certain things, but at the time, yeah, it was very different. Like, yeah, I would look at a blade and he would point out this. And even I remember when I was working with Takeda, he asked me to straighten all these blades and I did a box of blades, and he said, "Oh, none of those are straight. You got to do them again." I couldn't understand. Well, okay, well, they look straight to me but he said, "No, but you're looking at wrong." So it was all about seeing, right? That was the first kind of thing. It was all about seeing first. You got to learn how to see.
Yeah.
If you can't see, how can you do anything? How can you do good work if you can't actually see?
Absolutely.
On that topic, I wanted to mention I think we're trying to do single bevel sharpening classes with Ivan online. And then one of the things was, how do we get people how do we teach online to be able to spin it and
Yeah,
such?
it's really
Anyway,
difficult. Yeah.
It's a work in progress. I wanted to just let you guys know I have to get into the Tosho showroom right now, so you guys can
Okay.
Sure.
like just continue talking and then wrap it up the way in any mode that you guys need to. But then
Yeah.
Sure.
I'm not going to be here when you do that, just so you know.
No worries.
Okay. Okay.
But thank
Sure.
you so much for everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Ivan. Thank you, David.
Yeah.
Talk to you soon.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Talk to you soon.
Interesting. Yeah, that
So yeah, that first initial experience with Kosuke's father was really unique, really unique, because some knives are really bad,
yeah.
and there's some like sometimes there's no hope. Like it's almost like, well, yeah, you can get the spine straight, but you can't get the edge straight.
Yeah.
Like they don't align sometimes, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of the time it's like, well, this is only going to get to 70%, or this is only going to get to 80%. So yeah, it's a very interesting. Yeah, that's where I started actually when I came to Japan, when I was first started working with Kosuke and his father, because basically I was doing edge sharpening and straightening, and I did that for a long time, day after day, because that's what I was good at, edge sharpening. So everybody,
Yeah.
that's where they put me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's good. It's good that they were able to use you for your strength, because that was one thing that in talking to you that was a surprise when hearing you say like, oh, well, to actually edge sharpening isn't a big thing in Japan, because it's just kind of assumed that, the end user will put the edge they need on there. And how would the shop know if they need, a high grit or a low grit edge or highly refined or not? And that was hard for me to fathom. I was like, what do you mean? Like they're the ones doing the sharpening? And you're like, no, edge sharpening and actually shaping and sharpening the blade like Morihiro does are very different.
Yeah, very, very different. Those two, edge sharpening and grinding and polishing is
Yeah.
almost feels like a totally different category or skill, strength, or so yeah, really different.
So
And
with that, like we've definitely taken a fun tour through life, that we've been friends now for 6-7 years and hadn't heard some of this
Yeah.
stuff. So this has already been good. with respect to like for beginners and sharpening, like the world is so wide and so deep and so many different options for what to buy and what to do. I'd say definitely first and foremost, people can be hesitant towards one to jump into a class. I would definitely say take a class. It'll shortchange so much of like the early woes that you have. But from a kit perspective, with all the experience you've had with all the different things you've tried, if you're trying to construct like a bare bones kit, what would you recommend a bare bones kit actually be?
That's an interesting question, actually. I always it's different if you want to just maintain a knife or you actually want to start sharpening.
Okay.
Like in the kitchen, I've always found, just for myself and the people that I worked with, it was always better to kind of start backwards. And what I mean by that is not just say, hey, I'm just going to buy low grit stones and I'm going to start from there. And every time I sharpen a knife, I'm just going to start from 400 or 200 and go up to whatever grit I want to finish it on. So I've always felt like, okay, get a knife, make sure that it is sharp first.
Yeah.
That it does function the way you want it to for whatever work you're doing. And then get to learn how to use a leather strop really well. Learn what that's like. And then go backwards from there. So use a leather strop until it doesn't function. It's not getting the edge that you want. After that, go to go down from there to a finer stone, like whatever, like a 3,000 grit stone
Okay.
would be like, you know what I mean? So
Sure.
for
So
for somebody in
literally
a,
start your sharpening, like your first acquisition, actually have that be leather, not actually like a low grit, like a 1K, like most people seem to steer people towards.
I think it's good if you want to. What I found is that a 1K is good to maintain an edge, but often if the knife is already sharp, you don't really need to. You don't have to always go back to a stone every
Sure.
time, right? And I
Sure.
think
Sure.
maybe you've experienced this too. Like even just
Yes.
passing it a few times on leather, you can bring that back. So it's always for me. It's always been like try as much as possible not to sharpen. Actually,
Yeah.
that sounds kind of weird, but
It's like golf, right? When you get really good at golf, you play less because you're fewer strokes to
right. Yeah, it's kind of the same thing. It's like try not to sharpen as much as you can, especially for kitchen knives. If you buy kitchen knives, and they're a lot of kitchen knives are expensive and actually really beautiful. So
Yeah.
trying to keep them as they were when you bought them has always been, for me anyways, has been what I wanted. So I've always tried to go the opposite way and just learn the maintenance first.
Sure.
And then if you want to get into sharpening, yeah, definitely. Then I would say you definitely need a 1,000 grit stone, but you need lower grits. And
Okay.
a lot of people feel that, yeah, if you go too low, you're going to be removing too much steel. But often, if you start at a 400 grit, it can actually be faster than if you say, okay,
Yes.
I'm just going to start this knife at 1,000 grit. 1,000 grit is good for maintenance, but if you really want to bring back the edge, you've got to go lower. So yeah, 400, 1,000, 3,000 stone, and the leather strop. I think all like that is pretty much what you need to start.
Do you still pretty for especially people that might be more price sensitive, think Chaucer is still a good price to performance way to look for a beginner set?
I definitely do. I think there's a lot of other stones out on the market now. Chaucers are priced really well and they perform really well, especially for
Hmm.
edge sharpening. They tend to give a really nice, especially off the 1,000 grit stone, like that 1,000 grit stone and just leather.
Hmm.
Like it's a great combination. But there's so many different stones out there, so I think you can actually find some probably lower priced stones even than the Chaucer, because a lot of people do find them expensive. Or you can go with combination stones too. That's
Sure, sure.
always right. Like get a combination stone and then a leather strop. But
So especially for people that are starting out, like if there is a desire to find, what is the right stone for me, that process, especially when you're in both trying to learn it and trying to figure out what your preferences might be. Any shortcuts for helping people like shortchange that process of like, hey, I know I want a 1K stone, but how do I choose between the King 1K, the King Hyper 1K, the Chaucer 1K, the Shapton 1K? Like any tips on that aside from like, yeah, just get good at sharpening and then see if you like the edge?
yeah, I mean, I found like definitely performance wise with stones, they do all perform very differently on different steels. Um, I've always found like for example, the King Professional or the Chaucera, or sorry, Naniwa Professional that looks like a brick, right?
Yes.
It looks brick, like it's made from, like it looks like it's a clay brick. I've always
Yes.
found like those tend not to cut stainless steel very well, and I don't
Okay.
think they're intended to. So I think when you're looking at stones, they may be very cheap, but you've got to kind of look at what knives you have, what type of steel you're using, and you should be able to match that to the stones that you're going to use.
Okay.
And that's pretty easy to do. If I mean, if you're nowadays it's easy if you can contact the shop that sells them or whoever's you're buying the stones from, or even go online and you can figure out which stones are best suited for which type of knives that you currently have, because they all stones are so different from each other, and they
Yeah.
all don't function the same. Like if you put like 5 or 10 1,000 grit stones in a row, they're all going to be very different from each other. So that's the one thing that I always think is like really look at what you have to be, what you're going to be sharpening. If what you have is just stainless steel, um, you should be looking at some different stones.
Interesting. That's a good
Other
point.
than if it was carbon steel.
Yeah, and especially Hitachi carbon. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Or single bevel versus double bevel, like that kind of thing.
yeah, very true. Very, very true. So that feat that we mentioned earlier in the talk, where you were able to take on a 400 grit Chaucera, and you're able to take that. I'm trying to remember what knife we were even sharpening, but you're able to take that
It was
to
a blue. It was blue steel. I remember that, and it was a Konosuke.
was it that Kurochi blue one?
Yeah, that's right. That's what it was. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think Jude had been working on that a little bit, so I was like, yeah, this one definitely needs sharpening. I think that's right. And you're able to get that literally shaving sharp off that 400, and the tooth that was on that edge, especially after it was 400 grit, couple strops on leather, and like that thing felt incredible. For people that are doing like if they're have that same combination, they have the 400, they have the leather, but it's not getting to that shaving sharp, and they're trying to follow those same steps that they're doing. What would you recommend that they start looking at or honing in on? And is it maintaining your angle better? Is it managing your water better? Is it less mud, more mud? Like what would you recommend if someone's saying like, hey, I'm using the exact same tools, but obviously my technique is lacking and I'm not good enough to see where it's lacking? What is usually like the first areas to focus on trying to improve?
Yeah, the holding the angle and just being comfortable with the actual technique of sharpening. Um, Forget about the stone, what needs to be done with the stone, but just that first being able to hold the knife and consistently hold an angle is really key, actually. The holding the angle tends to be the thing that sets like a really good edge from like just an okay edge,
Okay.
and also being that you're in control of your angle, that you know that okay, if I'm at a certain degree and I want to actually go off, I want to go lower, I want to go slightly higher, you're in control of that. So a lot of times when I've in classes, when we were teaching classes in Tosho, a lot of people when they're sharpening, they can't really tell that they're kind of rocking back and forth as they go when they're on the stone, right? So yeah, like the first thing is like is to be able to hold the knife in the right position and just feel it and lock into the angle, whatever angle that is going to be for that edge. That's the first thing you've got to really think about. After that, yeah, the stone, how you prepare the stone, even the shape of the stone, all those things is really important as well. But I would say the technique of just holding the knife and keeping that angle is the most important thing. Your finger placement of both hands on the knife, what is key.
Yeah. How do you ever like? I know they have those sharpening rigs that will hold the blade at a specific angle and won't allow you to sharpen outside of that. I think that definitely gets away from the romantic desire to just have that free-handed talent. What would you ever recommend someone using, like a guide for helping ensure that angle that they're holding at the beginning? What could they be looking for? Like when you were saying those people that were rocking the blade as they're going, they're not noticing that they're doing that. What can they look for to help confirm, like, hey, that's what I'm doing, I'm not holding this angle well?
Well, you'll be able to see it immediately on the knife, because if you can lock into a certain angle,
Mhm.
and angles and all those things are another topic, but I mean, you can definitely buy things that can, if you can put it on the blade and you can actually tilt the blade at a certain angle, and you can see which angle you're at, right? An angle
Mhm.
finder. And that can, if you don't have a teacher, if you're at home, you can actually, that's one good way to set that up. The other way is to hold the blade onto the stone and just find an angle, and using your nail,
Mhm.
you can
Mhm.
tell. I think I showed you this too on the
Yes.
stones. You can, with it, if it's too low, you're going to be able to feel your nails can hit the edge, right?
Yes.
But if you bring it up to a certain point, there's going to be a point where it doesn't catch anymore.
Yes.
And then make a few passes across the stone and to take a look at the edge to see if you're either lower or you're higher. You can tell where you hit, right?
Yeah.
Just make a few passes, take a look at the edge. Okay, did I hit where I want to be? Can I see that? Because you can see on the bevel where the
Yeah.
stone left its mark, right? Its scratch mark. So then from there, yeah, just try to lock into that angle. It takes time. It definitely does take time. But
Yeah. Interesting. And you would imagine like the cueing is always to make sure, you know, as you're sharpening, you'll see like the change in color along the edge. You're hoping to see a uniformed size of new micro bevel being formed. And if you are rocking, you would imagine you'd start to see some scuffs above that.
you will. Yeah, you'll see it above. You'll see it, yeah, above the back bevel. You'll break that line, right?
Yes.
And then you'll see it rounding, or you're going to see, yeah, you'll see scuffs above on the blade. So that'll tell you immediately. And that can even tell you, okay, where, like, a lot of people are really good on one side and not good on the other side,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
So you can quickly tell just by looking at the blade, okay, I've got to fix this, right?
Yeah.
Or, I'm good
Absolutely.
here, but I've got to adjust this.
So you know, for a long time, you've used a lot of stuff for sure. You've used natural stones, you've used synthetic stones. I know there's been a big push from both Koman and then through Tosho with the NSK diamond stones. And there was a big push from that. Like, how, after having such a storied career, you know, on the Choceras, like, what was it like running into the NSK diamond stones? Like, how all are they different? And I know we're starting to butt up into the hour time mark, so I don't suppose I need to ask you about the details of every piece of line, but I know you've mentioned there's a lot there, that it isn't just like, hey, it's this but diamond. There's quite a bit more to them than just that.
I think for me, it's always, like, I tried NSK stones a long time ago, actually, because NSK has been around since the mid '90s. Actually, a lot of
Really?
people don't know that. Yeah, they've been there's one guy. The company is literally one guy. He's been making diamond abrasives since the mid '90s. So he's in Kyoto, which is really great for me.
Yeah.
But but when I kind of, I had to use a lot of different other companies' diamond stones, and never been so happy with them, and kind of just always been searching for something better, because I don't often, myself personally, I don't want to really think about the stones much. I just want to get to the work, right?
Sure.
So for when I first started using NSK's, the lines he already had, the stones he already had, I was pretty blown away by, wow, there's a lot of variety, which probably is not good for everybody, but for me it was great, because there was like this type, these were harder, these are softer, there's so many different varieties. So I could really, for myself personally, I could tailor everything to, okay, well, this is good for this is good for this knife, this was good for this blacksmith, this was good for this maker. So
Yeah.
they really changed kind of the speed and the accuracy that I could get, and that was the main reason why I switched over to actually starting to use NSK. And then eventually I just decided, well, okay, it wasn't even a decision, it was just naturally like, oh, well, okay, well, this is what's got to be done right now. So
Sure.
I switched completely. I was asking Yuka the other day, and she said, wow, you really just only use pretty much 90%. That's in synthetic stones, that's all you're using, right? But
Yeah.
it was really that the speed, the accuracy that I was getting, and the variety. Like it wasn't just that they were all one series, right? I could
Yeah.
really pick and choose. That's one. Those are the main reasons.
And I'd imagine the life of the stone relative to how much you're sharpening it has to play into it too. I remember you talking about like, yeah, I think I took 2 centimeters off of a Chaucera today when you were working on some project. It was-
Yeah, well, you're always trying to keep the stones flat. Like that's
yeah.
without the stones being flat, for me anyways, I just could never you can't get the results that you want, especially for foundation work or for polishing. So keeping them maintaining the stone and just having the stone maintain be able to maintain itself, like it wasn't wearing out quickly, was a big deal. So the diamond stones, of course, everything wears out. It's not that
Sure.
things last forever, but they definitely wear much slower. But not even that, they cut faster, and you can once you start to really understand how they work, and you can prep the surface. So there's a lot more variety in the approach, how you approach the stones than
And by
just
cut faster, you don't just mean like oh hey they have a 60 grit which cuts faster than this 220. It's a 400 NSK versus a 400 King. Like that NSK is grinding closer to like a 220 like synthetic stone like a
yeah, I guess in the speed that it could cut,
yes
yeah,
yeah
in the speed, yeah. There's definitely a learning curve to NSK stones, and I think any diamond stone actually, because they are very different. The feedback is different. The user how user friendly they are is very very different. So
okay
I mean, when I first tried NSK stones, I tried one series that was really only sold in Japan called Oboro Tool. It's mainly meant for actually Japanese tools, and those stones are extremely hard, and you don't even there's no feedback whatsoever. But for some people, those are perfect.
okay
So yeah, definitely a learning curve. But one thing about the NSK stones in Japan, lots and lots of mainly woodworkers used them. So
okay
and they were getting great results from them. So I started using them actually for kitchen knives. So that's why I got this relationship. And we started working with NSK, and then we started actually making other lines and stuff like that with NSK for
yeah
kind of mainly for kitchen knives. But yeah, it's definitely a process, a journey to get everything perfect. But
it's cool that you
getting there.
have the ability to actually approach that though. Like where before it was, hey, this 1K doesn't exactly do what I want. I guess I'll try another brand. Well, I guess I'm trying another brand. Well, I guess I'm trying another brand. Now be able to have a collaboration with someone to say like, hey, maybe this 1K that you're making is perfect in this application, but I could use one that's for a different application that I need a few differences, and you can just talk and formulate with him as opposed to taking a spin around the market again.
Yeah, that's a huge change. That's like changed everything actually. Like to be able to say, okay, well that this stone pulls out steel on this type of knife. Can it be changed? For polishing, it's not cutting as fast as I want. Can you change the recipe or the hardness or
Yeah.
slightly? And then you will. And then so yeah, it's really incredible to be able to do that. And even to order like different types of stones for different types of knives, different shapes, different styles. Yeah, it's totally different. It totally makes everything different. You
Interesting.
can you can really look and realize, okay, yeah, I can I can actually even get better at my own technique by being able to have these stones, right? And working with this
Yeah.
maker specifically. So
That's really
yeah,
cool.
very big change.
We mentioned when we were talking about what would potentially a beginner kit look like when we kind of said like, well, absolutely leather is important. Then maybe a 400, a 1K, and a 3K, or a 400, a 1K, and a 6K. Obviously, NSK is a little spendier than some of the other stones that are out there. But if we're talking strictly Hanbasuke, and we were talking the majority of Hitachi carbon steel, so white 1, white 2, blue 1, blue 2, maybe blue super, what would your go-to? You only get one 400, you only get one 1K, and then either a 3K or 6K, and then leather. They've got so many different lines, so many different choices. What would your go-to be with that intention? Double bevel knives, Hitachi steels.
I mean, yeah, right now it's probably the Oboro 400. Then after that, the Hakuto 1500, and the probably Oboro 3000 would probably be that kind of lineup.
Interesting. Interesting. How would that Oboro 400 compare to like the edge that you pulled off on that Chosera 400, that Naniwa Pro 400 edge?
It's different. It's a lot more crisp, and it doesn't feel like the thing about I found with NSK stones is that the edge that's coming off of them feels like a different grit.
Okay.
I'm not really sure why that is, but like the 1500 and even the Oboro 2000 grit, they just feel like a much higher grits. Like when you're actually cutting with the blade. So
sure,
something just about that that I really like.
That's cool.
And the 400 just by itself on its own, you could just really just use that stone with leather, and that's it. That would be your kit.
That definitely sounds perplexing to me. I might want to take that for a spin. I know. We've talked about potentially doing like different aspirations on YouTube and video and helping to. The thing that you mentioned at the beginning, like when it was 2010, 2012, and you wanted certain information on Japanese knives, the only option was to go to Japan. And now there's been this proliferation of information coming out of Japan, and it's so much more accessible. But there still is, I don't want to say not necessarily leave something to be desired. That's not the right way to put it. But perhaps there's still so much more that could be done that we've talked about before. And you and Yuka actually have started doing that. How's you guys have got YouTube channel? What's the handle on that?
Yeah, we started the Ivan Yuka, and mainly to kind of just show what we're doing in Japan, and also kind of get to show I've always really wanted to show what the process is really like. I think that's like, what's it really like? Like, what's it really take to sharpen this or polish this? Like, what steps do you need to go through, or how do you even have to look at the knife to even think about polishing or sharpening? So that the channel is really about that, and just wanting to kind of bring people into that world that they don't often see, and starting and including other things that other people we work with, and other craftsmen, and in the sword world too, and we're going to be showing actually some sword polishers in upcoming videos and different things. It was really about that. It's really just showing kind of our world that we thought, yeah, it would be interesting for people to get just to see kind of really how things are done, rather than kind of it's wondering, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say, because it's very different from, unless you have that behind the scenes access, which that's very different, having that access even compared to just visiting. People think like, oh, if I visit Japan, I can see X, Y, and Z. And it's like, you'll definitely see more if you visit, but there's a step beyond that when when it's like you that got to stay with Takeda for a period of time and work with him versus you who got to work with like Kosuke's father for all that time with this. Like there's another layer of both. It's like you get to function as our eyes and pointing us in the right direction while also having more access than the general public even could, even on a visit. This seems it truly is fascinating.
Yeah, it's difficult it was difficult to start because actually when you're doing the kind of work that I do, you're by yourself all the time, day after day, and you don't talk. I never talk about actually this stuff with anybody. Maybe you and
Yeah.
a few other people, right? But it was a little difficult to start it, but it was always something that I've always wanted to do, and I think I've talked to you about this before, and just wanted to just show people how this world and kind of how things are done, how you approach things, and what other craftsmen, what they're thinking about, and how they do, and what they think about, and what they want, what their goals and things are in their work. So yeah, it's just a world that is, I wouldn't say it's closed on purpose, but it's just like I think people are really focused on their work all the time, so they're never really concerned about, well, should I show anybody? Should I let people have access? I don't think it's not that they're really. It's just that they're just busy all the time.
Sure.
So, yeah, starting this channel was kind of and it was really that idea, like let's bring people into this world, a world that is often, kind of maybe misunderstood, but it's not that anyone's trying to shut anybody out. It's just that, it's a busy, everybody's busy all the time and focused.
And some of that stuff, like you go to those workshops, they're not tourist shops. You know what I mean? Like this is a workshop.
Yeah, no,
where
it's a workshop. Yeah.
And so it's like, it's not necessarily the cleanest, the tidiest, because it's like, there's just lots and lots of work to be done by people who are very busy working. And the craftsmen I got to visit were very gracious and very, very, happy to talk with me. But you could definitely tell it's like, this isn't a place that has a lot of through traffic. This is a place where a lot of work is done, and that can be limiting in the exposure you can have then.
Yeah, they're all workshops, and of course there's a lot of workshops too where people just want to kind of keep their work really private as well.
Sure.
Well, there's a lot of sword polishers that actually don't want to give any access whatsoever to anybody. So
really,
it can be, it's hard definitely when people want to see stuff or just they have a curiosity, right? Oh, how is this done? Or how did they make that, or how do you polish that? So I wanted to, with the channel, me and you could kind of want to, bring certain things to light and progressively bring more things into the channel. But it was great. We finally started it. So
yeah, it looks good.
It's been good so far.
Even just some of the stuff that she and I have talked about before about working on, like the thumbnail pictures, you can see how she's like, you guys are getting better even at some of those simple processes of like, hey, you're a master of the craft. Like you have these deep inroads with so many different like facilities across Japan, but putting it on YouTube is its whole new thing that you have to learn on top of it, and seeing that progress with all of it is cool.
It's difficult. It's really difficult because you're always doing your own work, but actually to think about how to show it is totally different.
Absolutely.
So bear with us. We're just getting better. We'll get better.
Well, I mean, the videos you got out are definitely very interesting and eclectic. Like some of the stuff you have on there, I don't know. I've maybe seen one or two videos like it ever in a certain extent, because there isn't the English speaking access to broad parts that you're able to show. So it's very fascinating, and I think as more people get exposed to it, they'll get caught up into the things that you found so interesting for all these years that brought you to and have kept you in Japan.
Yeah, absolutely. And the YouTube channel, hopefully, we have a lot more. We have a lot of stuff we want to actually show. So there's a lot of videos that we've planned already that are really interesting. Actually, I can't wait to get them out there. But
That's
there's a
cool.
lot of interesting stuff coming. Yeah.
So if people want to find you, they want to follow you and make sure that they're not missing out both on posts for Instagram and video. Where should be looking? I know you have your personal, which is Tosho Works, and then you also
That's right.
have Komon. But what else? Where all can we find you?
Yeah, there's Ivan Yuka that's on Instagram, and then Ivan Yuka is Ivan Yuka Japan is the YouTube page. So that's where you can find the videos and kind of updates and stuff like that for the videos is on Instagram at Ivan Yuka Japan. So and then I don't unfortunately post a lot of stuff on my Instagram. I should more. I'm always like finish something and send it out. I'm like, oh damn, I should have posted that, but that was too late. I'm pretty bad. Sorry, I'm pretty bad at that. But
Well, hopefully
I'll
now
get
with cameras, living in your face for YouTube, that should help be a little better about. I should say we should have a Tosho, whether through Knife Club or something. We should actually do a survey sometime of what are some user requested things that what would they like to see, whether that's a sharpening series or even just an introduction to polishing series. I think it'd be really good because in the same way that sharpening can be daunting to get into, I think polishing is even more so because so much of that really relies on the eyes of an expert to train you in on things at the start. So
it looks like our time's up, David. I saw Ray
give us the round
of yeah.
All right, man. Well, as always, it's always good talking to you. We kept this one.
Good to talk to you too.
That's a short one for us, I think.
That's a short one. Yeah, definitely. We're always like 4 hours. But.
And that beautiful morning sunlight coming through the window there. Because what time is it for you?
No morning sunlight. I woke up at 2 a.m. and it's still 4:16 here right now. So
make yourself a nice cup of coffee and see the sun, right?
I will. Yeah, that's right.
But always good talking to you, man. This has been fun. We'll have to do it again. Thank you, Olivia and Tosho, for hosting us. This has been fun.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks, Olivia. We're going to sign off.
Sorry for disappearing at this time. There was a schedule that we had to follow, and it's funny because Jackie Lynn was just talking and he mentioned you, Ivan, a few times. So it was kind of crossing over, but it's kind of cool that you guys were having this discussion that we can go back to. And then everything's full circle. It's just kind of such an interesting way of seeing things. As David, you're asking just like how we started. And then these guys are talking about meeting Ivan in the basement and then him gifting, a specific knife and stone to Jackie specifically. Anyway,
yeah, that's right.
It just happened right now.
Yeah.
And
I remember that stone. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, it brings back a lot of memories, but it's so neat. And David, I wish you were here because you could even try some of these natural stones here too that Natter has. But anyway, thank you so much for having this conversation with us. And hopefully you can do it again if you're interested. But yeah.
Well, let's try to pick a time that's not the middle of the night for Ivan because he's.
But
past that, I'm always happy to talk with anyone about knives. I always love to do that.
Yeah, definitely. Let's. I think this is a really interesting thing, so we should definitely keep on going with this and. Hopefully get some more feedback from people and cover some other topics next time.
Yeah,
that would be awesome. Thank you.
Well, thanks again,
guys,
Olivia.
We'll see you.
Thanks, Ivan.
Yep. Sorry?
Yep.
I was going to say thanks again.
Thanks, Olivia.
Thanks for having us on. It was a lot of fun. Looking forward to the next one.
Yep.
Yes. You're welcome and thank you. Take care.
Okay.
Bye.
See you guys.
Bye.
Bye, David. Bye, Olivia. Bye.